I'm speaking to you from the library of the Lotus School of Liberal Arts, and we're a mindfulness-based high school, as Henry had said, and we're one of the very few in the country. And more than mindfulness, we're based in techniques and practices derived from Zen Buddhism. And I think that makes us the only one of its kind, perhaps in North America. The mindfulness in schools movement has grown enormously, along with the yoga in schools movement. And over the last several years, a lot of people, some of whom are very well known, like Sharon Salzberg, others who are quite obscure, like myself, have done a lot of work in, in figuring out how to really make mindfulness and these kinds of practices effective for people in a lot of different settings. So whether it's in schools or work or in love relationships or in other kinds of partnerships or with your children, any kind of relationship. So mindfulness is derived from Buddhist practice, and it is one of the Eightfold Path. So a lot of people are aware of the Eightfold Path, and the Eightfold Path is basically a response from, when the Buddha was teaching, he identified discontentment as a quality, as the basic quality of human existence, and that discontentment arises from desire, and the way to cut off desire or to blunt the way that desire drives our discontentment is the Eightfold Path. It's kind of a bit manualized, right? In the sense that here's a path, and here are the 8 limbs or the 8 folds of it. It would be, correct view, correct thought, correct speech, correct action, correct lifestyle and effort, and correct mindfulness and correct concentration. And so sometimes mindfulness, which is in a way just awareness, gets foregrounded or emphasized a bit more than these other aspects. And in traditional Buddhist practice, Buddhist training, and in Zen training, which I'm most familiar with, the mindfulness is only one part of it. I teach, this is sword, for instance, Zen sword. And so I would liken to mindfulness being kind of the mass of the sword and concentration being the edge, the sharp edge of the sword. And without concentration, mindfulness is a pretty blunt instrument. Awareness, but it doesn't necessarily create an imperative for action. And of course, action is living. And certainly a high school isn't going to be very successful if the kids don't learn how to take action. So this eightfold perspective can be considered and applied in many ways. And so at our school and in my work here as a teacher and a counselor, and also in my private practice and my private teaching of martial arts and meditation, I look at this in the sense of what is developmentally right for adolescence. So that's where we begin. So Zen is a branch of Buddhism that emphasizes direct experience of the self. And increasingly, at least in Western Zen, the social and non-human worlds are as much a part of it as meditation is. And so this is the discussion that is had sometimes about engaged Buddhism or engaged Zen. In our school and in traditional Zen training, rituals such as bowing when entering a certain room, and other techniques such as we do silent cleaning on Fridays, we do chores every day. There's the Shimgum-do, which is the martial art that I teach. There's yoga. These different practices create conditions for the student to see themselves and see their own awareness, how that awareness changes and shifts and moves, changes in intensity, and that this practice is guided by a teacher who is trained, which in this school is me. And so Shimgum-do, which is a Zen is a Zen practice, was developed by the master Chonsik Kim. He's my teacher. He lives in Boston, where he has a residential temple where he teaches. And this is a comprehensive mental and physical training. And it develops compassion for the self and for others. So even though it's pretty effective as a fighting art and as a art for training meditation, concentration, physical dexterity, and so forth, it's primarily about compassion and awareness. So in a high school setting, the direct experience of oneself happens in ritual. It happens in service to other people. It happens in martial arts training and in the community, which is to say it happens in relationships. And so what our students see is they see themselves in relationships, in flux, and they become more and more comfortable with that. And that's I see my role as a teacher and the role of a teacher or as a therapist as creating the conditions and cultivating the conditions where that awareness can happen for the student. So that was a lot of stuff. Anybody have any questions? Or I don't even know how that would work. Maybe you just type it in and I'll just address it. I'll give you guys a minute to do so. Marian asks, what are the similarities and differences between mindfulness and focusing? That is something I'm going to go into. So let's, right here, one of the other things I do, so I'm trained in Zen, I'm trained in focusing, and I'm trained as a psychotherapist. And I have learned to bring much of this together pretty much at any time. So when I discuss using the whole school day and the different rituals and obligations and activities, I mean that I train the kids to, when their attention drifts or when they're being careless, to recognize why they're being careless or how they're being careless and to come back to the activity that they're doing. And the awareness of that movement is part of the Zen training. The focusing part of that would be noticing, say, for instance, when I say to a student, hey, no talking, this is silent cleaning, and she might look angry or might react, in some way. And then that's an opportunity to say, okay, so now this is where some of the focusing comes in. So let's notice what was going on right there. Where were you feeling that frustration or that anger? And we might do that in the moment. We might do that a little bit later. And that's a way for them to notice what they're experiencing in real time. And then to be more aware of it as it arises, say next time we're cleaning or next time she's in class or something like that. So focusing, I think, is really nicely defined by Anne Cornell as a way of tapping into your vast emotional intelligence through the message of your body. With focusing, you return to a source of knowing that has always belonged to you. Focusing gives you direct access to your own inner compass, where you know the right direction of your life. Focusing works because life naturally wants to move forward and find new possibilities. Sometimes we get stuck because we get cut off from that natural life forward energy. So I was saying my work is to create the conditions for young people to experience that forward energy for themselves. And to do that in academics and in community and friendships and other relationships. So, and that's, Matt now asks, where does the mirror come from? That is the mirror. So because we live in a body, we are a body, and we do things in the world with our bodies, it's those activities that provide the opportunity to mirror, to see. And so this is a favorite example of mine. I will, the students will be doing a martial arts form and say they have the sword in their hand and they cut like this and they go too far over. And I'll look at one of them and I'll say, I'll just look at them, and then the kid will go, boom, and put it into the correct position. And I'll say, I didn't say anything. How did you know what was correct? And he might say, oh, I don't know. I just knew I was wrong. Oh, okay. So something in you knew what the correct position was, but then something in you also did it wrong anyways. Well, how does that happen? And that's often a really wonderful opening moment of this kind of teaching and experience for a student, because they realize, yeah, that is kind of odd. Obviously, I knew it was correct, but I did it incorrect anyways. And that's a great entree into there being multiple selves or multiple motivations. And you know, for a young person, noticing where that lack of attention or lack of detail, that lack of caring, that lack of engagement arises from, is a really important first step for awareness. And so that's the mirror. So that's the way that I use Zen training and focusing at the same time. Focusing, I think, this won't be in the notes, but one of the things that I really enjoy about Gene Genlin's work is his linguistic and philosophical writing. I enjoy that as much as I enjoy the process model. And why I do is because his work with Husserl and Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, the phenomenologists, to me are address in a Western, in an indigenous Western way, many of the questions that Buddhism sought to address, you know, thousands of years before. So we're a little late to the party as Westerners, but there is 100, 200-year-old tradition of working with these problems. It was largely articulated in phenomenology and existentialism, and Gene Genlin, I think, articulates it beautifully in his philosophical and linguistic writings. So for me, something naturally that works for Westerners is in focusing in a way that I think is harder with Zen. Zen has a lot of Eastern Asian baggage that doesn't translate as well. Patriarchy, hierarchy, there's a kind of playfulness but dominativeness with, to coin a word, with Zen that really needs to be refined in order to work in our culture. So I think focusing gives another entree. So that all being said, and knowing that these students live and work in a community and that everything in the school day is meant to hold up a mirror to them so they can see themselves in flux and changing, as always moving. I want to move in a little bit into Dan Siegel's work. So Siegel he's done really great work out at his, what was it, the Mindsight Institute? I think it's at UCLA. He's done lots of interesting research. And I think that his work on health and Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma has been two major sources of research literature for me in thinking about how to apply this stuff to adolescent life. So in his recent articles and in popular books, Siegel describes 4 qualities of adolescence as markers of normal development. And one is emotional spark, and there's social engagement, novelty seeking, and creative exploration. And first of all, I love the health orientation of this, rather than looking at it in terms of developmental stages or as pathology. And I think they're right. I think he has nailed it. So emotional spark has a neurological basis. There's more activity in the limbic area, in the brainstem, and the body is much more alive. It's sexually alive. It's got more energy. It's developing power and muscle and all kinds of needs for activity. And this really has a huge effect on cortical activity and at a time when the brain isn't really fully integrated. So there's bunch of integration that needs to happen, even as all of this new signal and data and intensity in the nervous system is ramping up. Social engagement, right? There is another neurologically driven need. I mean, the changes in the type and intensity of signals from the brainstem and the midbrain, the limbic system, motivate teenagers to seek out peers, to look to peers for connection and to look to new experiences and ideals and everything like that. So the emotional spark and the social engagement are two vast impulses in a young person that need to be met in school. They're in school a lot. And then there's novelty seeking. So just the changes in how pleasure is experienced and how activity is rewarded, the intensity of that system changes in young people during this time of life. And it tends to, for teenagers, for the most part, to favor novelty over routine, which, novelty for its own sake doesn't do very much, right? Because novelty is always reacting to the next novelty. So in order for novelty to have meaning, some kind of routine is important. So I try to keep a very clear routine schedule here at school for students, but I warmly respond to deviations from the routine because that's natural for teenagers to do. So they need that routine in order to really see their desire for novelty, to do something different. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Novelty for its own sake is an impulse, but the adults in a young person's life create the routine so that novelty has meaning and context, and can also be experienced, can be reflected on. The last thing after emotional spark, social engagement, and novelty seeking for Siegel is creative exploration. And I'm not hugely satisfied with this as a term, but I would put it as, it's kind of a combination of all of this emotional responsiveness and social engagement and this need for novelty. And all this taken together just drives teenagers to push against the limits set around them. And again, the limits are necessary, right, for them to experience their own push. If there's no limits, that push can become meaningless, which is pretty destructive to a young person. So, any questions about this? I see that Matinel mentions that it would be like looking at yourself in a mirror. And I think, well, the image of a mirror is a very, very traditional Zen image. And I don't think it's all that common in other types of Buddhism. So for instance, the supposed, but probably mythological main teacher of Zen, ancient main teacher, Huineng, who was as the story goes, an illiterate woodcutter who worked around this monastery, but was totally intrigued by the different Zen practices. This person came into awareness by answering a poem about a mirror, and then wrote his own poem about a mirror. And the mirror, therefore, is always a way of looking at the mind, that the mind reflects the world, but attaches nothing to it. So just like if an image is in a mirror, and then the person walks away, the image disappears too. So the mirror holds on to nothing. And so that is what's very important in Zen with the mirror as as a metaphor. And I use it in a more, less poetic way, just in the sense that it's just feedback. It's just seeing and being in the world, whether it's through our bodies or our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts. These are ways for us to see who we are. Okay, so any questions about this? What we're moving towards is the context for the school practices and a few exercises that I hope will help you all find some practical application in whatever work you're doing with young people. So to look at this work of Siegel's and others in another way, you look at, it's this, the brain is highly differentiated. There's a lot of different parts of the brain. And the teenage years are a time when these differentiated parts of the brain are getting integrated continually. And that the brain, this process of integration, is not only happening as a change, but that change is changing continually in response to relationships. That the brain is, especially the teenage brain, is all about relationships. Relationships to the self, relationships to the past, to the future, and relationships to others, especially peers. And so in this way of seeing it, experience itself changes the brain structure. So, our kidneys change, in response to toxins, in response to organic injury. But I don't think we can really say that the structure of the kidney changes with experience. The brain does. And this process is multilateral and accelerated in the teenage years. And reflective practices have been shown, demonstrated in many, many studies to both stimulate and consolidate this integration. So these mindfulness-associated practices, whether it's martial arts or yoga, mindfulness meditation, guided meditation, reflective listening, whole body listening, all these kinds of things stimulate and consolidate this integration, putting the brain of the young person in a condition that's healthier and more ready to deal with the complexities of adult life, including love relationships, work conflict, political crisis, all those sorts of things. The experience of seeing oneself, seeing into oneself, is the basis for having insight and empathy. To my mind, this has been proven beyond, almost beyond debate. Excuse me. Being able to see myself allows me the opportunity to develop an empathetic relationship with myself and my own complexity. That is the basis for allowing others the same experience. And that's what compassion is. And to end with Siegel, with Dan Siegel, he identifies 9 functions as being the result of this integrative activity. So body regulation, so knowing where your body is and also being able to soothe yourself when upset. Attuned communication, being able to move into another person's emotional valence and to really be with it. Emotional balance, meaning that you don't swing too far this way or that way. Response flexibility, meaning that when things are really intense, you can respond with intensity. When things quiet down, you can quiet down with it. It's kind of an athletic virtuosity, like being able to judge the playing field, respond to situations as they arise, and not overreact or underreact. Empathy, insight, which is a kind of self-knowing awareness. Fear modulation, so being able to recognize threats in a way that matches the threat and that allows you to respond to the threat without becoming overwhelmed and freezing or fleeing or attacking, unless those are what are called for. intuition, and morality. So these aspects, which Siegel goes through in some detail in his more recent book, are how this integration manifests when it's healthy. Now, another part of this, right? Another dimension to all this is attachment theory, which I would imagine all of us are familiar with. I just want to throw this out there. Does anyone have a question about attachment theory, or feels they don't have a good, a solid working understanding of attachment theory? Well, if there is a lag and someone puts a question up, I'll just answer it. I'll interrupt myself to answer it. Basically, attachment theory is, oh, okay. So attachment theory has a pretty sad and interesting story behind it. John Bowlby was a British man who is largely responsible for developing this theory, but he grew up in the same upper class, highly educated public school, which are the private schools in England. Abusive, isolating, cruel, gratuitously cruel, cold world that George Orwell grew up in. So Bowlby was cut from the same cloth. He went to medical school, and he found the lack of empathy, or that something was really missing in treatment. He also did psychiatric rounds, and he found that fairly unsatisfying, I think. And it wasn't until he took a position in the East End of London, a pretty impoverished neighborhood at the time, and this was in the late 40s, that he said that for the first time he noticed warmth between mother and child, of families having fun together. And he realized that, one, it was missing in his life, and two, that this had real psychiatric consequences. And he began to study and began to film mother-child, mother-infant interactions and mother and young child interactions, and develop a theory to explain the different kinds of attachment behavior he saw between the primary caregiver and the child. But let's suffice it to say that the point of attachment theory is to discuss is to find a way to discuss how our early experiences with our main caregiver shape our later relationships. And a parent who is present and warm and safe and fairly predictable will nurture, will bring into the world a child who experiences that in their relationships and with themselves, for the most part. So our early experiences of being cared for shape the brain and becomes the neurological basis for later life. Now, a young person's relationships with parents and peers and romantic partners and with authority figures are all clearly based on these early caregiving experiences. But my experience is that high school, in our schools, we have been able to successfully help students get past really adverse early experiences in caregiving and to become healthier, more loving, more responsive people as they move through adolescence and into adulthood. And part of the reason for that is that they had an orderly and safe environment, but they also had warm and clear relationships with teachers who played a much bigger role than just intellectual guides. So high school is a time where a person's way in their social and intimate worlds can be reshaped into more healthy social and attuned patterns. It can also be a time where dysfunctional ones emerge, especially if a lot of fearfulness and avoidance and anxiety marks the teenage years. And a lot of teenagers then learn to manage themselves with the use of drugs and tuning out in different ways, and overly sexualized relationships or video games. There's so many ways. But these patterns are really consequential for the rest of life. So what I'm saying is that a young person, there's an opportunity with a teenager for these disrupted early caregiving experiences to be readdressed to some degree and to be repatterned into something healthier. But it's just not going to happen in a giant high school. It's going to happen in a smaller community with more routine and these kinds of reflective practices that I described earlier. So it's a period of great opportunity for teenagers. And it's a lot of what we do here at the Lotus School and what we did at Seneca Martin Science as well. So is that clear enough with attachment theory? If it's really important, I think, if you have any interactions with humans, to have some familiarity with attachment theory. There's lots of video on YouTube that explains it well. Very significant. Has a great explanatory power. One of the things about focusing is that focusing can help us heal intrapersonally in our own selves those disrupted attachments as well. As we become our own parent, we become our own caregiver. And I think that's the client's client, as Gene Genlin called it, but the parent's parent as well. The focusing techniques, the process model in particular, is, for me anyways, has been a profound healing technique. Okay, so now we have a visual diagram. We have a diagram. And this appears in a paper by J. Christopher Farley, who teaches at the University of Illinois. And he is doing really interesting work that I just became aware of on how adult romantic relationships, adult sexual relationships, reflect a lot of early caregiving experiences. And that seems intuitively right to me, but he's doing some good writing on it. And he does some work with teenagers too, so it's something I'm pretty interested in. So let's take a look at this, what I call the compass of nerves when I sent it over. We can look at it there. Some of you may have seen this before. The upper left you're looking at, where it says secure, that combination of low avoidance and low anxiety, that's a pretty good place to be. And that's feeling pretty safe. And most people experience that somewhere in their lives. Some people experience a whole lot of that in their lives. They are very fortunate people who also are pretty dedicated to living that way. We move to the upper right quadrant, we have preoccupied, and that's a combination of low avoidance, meaning the person gets involved, with feelings and with other people, but high anxiety. And so the withdrawal in the company of others, the withdrawal into oneself, is a way of staying with feelings, but being preoccupied with them and experiencing them as very anxious. We wheel around to the bottom right quadrant. We have fearful and avoidant, which is a very unpleasant place to be sometimes. high anxiety, high avoidance. And that when we are in that kind of that state, we need relief right away. It's a very intense experience, right? And then over in the bottom left quadrant, dismissing avoidance is low anxiety, which might be the product or the function of dismissing, and high avoidance. So it's anxiety is lower, either because the dismissing of the emotion or the person or the whatever it was very effective, so the person feels little anxiety, or they just feel low anxiety and are dismissive because they're not connecting with people. I don't really know if we can tease those two out, but certainly the marker of it is avoidance. So if we took a moment here just to reflect for ourselves, think of a pretty good relationship, a friend or a family member, somebody who you see a lot of and like to be with. And let's just imagine where we are on that, on this little chart here. And I can see for myself, I can feel for myself a whole range of friends and acquaintances and relatives and colleagues over the years who I respond to feeling secure, or sadly, my being dismissive of them, or me responding with being preoccupied and almost trying to manage the situation more, or just avoiding them altogether, or avoiding anything conflictual or complicated. So I can see myself manifesting these in different relationships all around. Now, a teenager generally is not cognitively capable of this kind of awareness, or at least maintaining this kind of awareness. This would take some training. But for our purposes, if, for instance, I notice in myself that I am often fearful and avoidant to begin with in my relationships, or that it's a general character across many domains of my life, which it kind of is, for me. In attachment, in terms of attachment theory, I can see how that is rooted in my family life and in my early family life. And so there I can see how it's a pattern established early, and in my case, very much reinforced by what I experienced as a teenager. But fortunately, I had several really wonderful friends, and a couple of friends' families, and a couple of relatives who were, able to, be, safe people, and that, that, I think that allowed a little more flexibility. Now, if you look at somebody who is continuously fearful and avoidant or dismissive and avoidant in most of their work relationships and most of their sexual relationships and their family relationships, there's a good chance that that was a very strong pattern laid down early in life. And the opportunity for changing it and altering it in the teenage years just didn't happen. And most people are able to become healthy in their relationships, it seems. But there are a subset of us who get very, very stuck. And that stuckness is, we can see it in ourselves in some of our relationships. We can see it in different periods of our long lives. And we can see it in other people who are really suffering. So
Peter, sorry to interrupt. I get this like machine sound. Um, can you try putting on the headset that you have?
It wasn't working. The microphone wasn't working.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, I'm not hearing other complaints, so hopefully it's good enough. It's just, yeah.
Okay, so like I might have said, I can also use this chart dynamically to notice that, oh, I'm fearful and avoidant in one relationship. And then I do want that to change. I want to move with that so I can use some of my these techniques of mirror, right? Of training in martial arts and noticing what comes up in my mind, or doing focusing and just noticing what most important things come up when I reflect on a person who's problematic for me, who I respond to with fear and avoidance. And then I can go into a much more reflective state and try to keep with that. And it might be days, it might be several days. Then I myself will move into a more preoccupied state as I'm less avoidant, but I'm still anxious. And for me, I can move that into being secure by using focusing oriented techniques within a relationship. So this chart can also be dynamic, and I would prefer to use it that way instead of just as a diagnostic sort of thing. Okay, so now to teenagers. If uh, if we thought about teenagers and the impulsiveness and the reactivity and all that sort of stuff that we associate with young people, we can also look at that on that little chart as well, and just think about when a young person is upset and they're dismissive and they just won't listen to what their parent is saying, or they minimize the importance of some misstep they made. That's dismissiveness. And anger and hostility is a kind of fearfulness. And the withdrawing into the room and the sullenness is a kind of preoccupation. So these things that people describe in teenagers are not the result of hormones. Uh, they're a healthy brain integrating itself in response to a very complex and dynamic environment. And so perhaps this kind of visual will help us notice where a person is and then help them identify some of where they are in this circle and move into a more reflective state, help them stay in that reflective state, even if it is a little preoccupied, create that safe space for them. And imagine that that in itself will create the kind of security and stability and centeredness that'll be healthy for them. Now, this is something we can do in our school because it's small, but it is something that can be done in certain teaching relationships and certain teaching settings, and it certainly can be done in psychotherapy. That's just another way of looking at it. So this next graphic, this next illustration, is what I use to teach meditation. So Henry, if you would put that up, the triangle.
1 second.
No problem.
I also figured out the why it was making that noise, and it's over now, so we're good. Okay, so the triangle is here. I'm gonna share screen.
Okay, so I'm going to explain how I use this to teach. I use this with my adult private clients. I use this with students and parents. And I use this theoretically, as a way of explaining certain phenomena in teaching meditation or martial arts. So we're going to do an exercise in a few moments, a meditation exercise that I would like all of you to use this technique for. And this is based on Zen concentration techniques. I'm not exactly sure where this idea of the triangle came up with. I don't know whether it was something that came to me independent of other work or what. For the life of me, I can't figure it out. So I'm not taking credit for it, but I also don't know where it came from. But it works well. So concentration, when people begin in Zen training, they usually begin counting the breath. So breathing in, 1, breathing out, 2, 3, 4, and maintaining a sitting posture. Usually after a few moments, a person gets distracted and goes off somewhere else. When you notice that, when we notice that we've gone off somewhere else, that we've lost our concentration, a lot of times people get really judgmental. But what happens right there, it's an awareness, like, oh wow, I just went off my concentration. And there's, at that moment, that's mindfulness. Knowing that I left what I was concentrating on. Knowing that I was no longer listening to my friend as she was speaking. Knowing that my eyes were no longer on the road when I was driving. And coming into that mindfulness, that awareness is a movement of the mind. It's a movement of the brain. And practicing that awareness is an integrating function of the brain that's bringing different parts of the brain together, like I had mentioned earlier. And so with that mindfulness, then there's a choice. Oh, wow, you know what? That was a really difficult conversation I had yesterday. It just popped into my mind and took me right away from my breathing. Now, do I want to spend a little time with this difficult conversation, or do I want to go back to my breathing practice? Now, this is where focusing comes in. Like, I wonder which one I really feel most drawn to right now. You know what? I think I want to stay with that difficult conversation from yesterday for just a little while and kind of notice what comes up. And so that's a focusing technique right there. But you can do that within a meditation, because I'm choosing now to say, you know what, I'm going to stay with this. Now, going back to our previous chart, that's less avoidant. It might be highly anxious because, you know, it still might be an alarming conversation, but it's low avoidance. And that's what I mean by saying it's a little more preoccupied when we look on that circle chart just previously. Now, if I were to say, no way, I'm not going anywhere near that, that might be fearful avoidant, but I can acknowledge and say, yep, that is just too intense for me. I do not want it. I want to break from it. I'll leave that go for a bit. I'm going to go back to my breathing practice. Now, the self-compassion part is to say, well, this feels what's right for me. I'm just going to step away from this anxious conversation. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm going to go back to my breathing practice. And if it comes back, you know, I'll notice that, but I'm just going to gently go back to my concentration. And so to me, this is very much a place where Zen practice, Zen meditation practice, and focusing align. They align so much for me that they're almost indistinguishable. So what I'd like to do is to play a piece of music that has been a big part of my life for decades. It's by Erik Satie, who was a French composer in the late 19th and early 20th century. You may have heard his Gymnopédies, which are very famous, or his nocturnes. And he wrote music, he was way ahead of his time. He was part of the great avant-garde scene in Paris, you know, Picasso and Diaghilev and Jean Cocteau and all that stuff. But he was also a very, very fine pianist, but who just didn't need to overplay. And he was finding a way out from the super complex, big German stuff like Wagner and such things. And he wrote this piece of music where he just dashed off a bunch of simple intervals that had a kind of interesting relation to each other. And then he made a little variation on it, played instead of single notes as pairs of notes. And then he added a bunch of notation to make it a bit hard to read, adding double sharps and double flats, just to make it more confusing. Then he said, repeat 811 times, and then he titled it Vexations. And it was never performed in his lifetime. It wasn't until the early 60s that John Cage, the great American avant-garde composer and poet and performance artist, put together a performance of it, and it took about 24 hours. And many of the musicians found it to be kind of a mind-melting experience, playing this phrase over and over and over and over again. It's sort of the very beginnings of minimalism in music. And interestingly enough, John Cale, who would later go on to be one of the founders of the Velvet Underground, which is the hugely influential rock band in the late 60s, he was one of the pianists at that performance. So it's an odd set of things that are important to me, to my musical life. But so this piece of music is what I'd like you to do is, instead of concerned about your breathing, just take a few moments and get comfortable. And we'll how about we listen to this piece of music for about 2 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is to, as much as you can, only pay attention to the notes being played. And when something arises to direct your attention elsewhere, when something arises in you or in the room that you're in, and you notice your mind moving towards it, notice that moving towards it, almost like it's a physical movement. And then just acknowledge what it is that drew your attention, and then very gently and kindly bring yourself back to the music itself.
Okay, so I will share the image, right, that you wanted.
That's right. And so I'll credit my oldest son, Peter, with this wonderful image.
Can you see it? Do you see it? I'm not sure if I'm sharing it.
I can see it.
Okay, good. Then briefly, I'm going to start. Okay, so kind of
There's
tricky.
also, now there's yeah, there you go. Okay. And just one thing about this, if you can imagine that your attention is that white line, and those waves around the white line is just the attention.
Okay, so I'm going to start playing music, and we're going to go for 2 minutes, and then we're going to stop, right?
Right. So go from concentration to awareness to compassion.
Okay. Just making sure I'm sharing computer sound. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we can imagine that if that piece of music is the object of our attention, that object of our attention can be the breath, it can be another person speaking to us, it can be cleaning the kitchen floor, slicing carrots, doing a martial arts form, holding an asana longer than one is used to, playing a piece on the guitar, staying perfectly still while hunting or fishing or waiting for a pitch, any of these things. When we have an object of concentration, that allows us to see the movement of our mind because we think in relative terms. So how can we, for teenagers, right, establish that object of concentration? And how do we establish it for ourselves? So when we listen to that piece by Eric Satie, which is a little, still even now, even a little unconventional, we can simply follow the piece and notice when our mind moves somewhere else. And that's the mirror. And if we have practices like that, and really develop them in our own lives, we can teach that more effectively to young people who will benefit because it allows them to see themselves more clearly. So any questions at this point?
I was noticing how even though I practice focusing a lot and noticing my thoughts a lot, I'm really bad at the concentration thing. Or I don't know if it's bad or something, but noticing that it's, it varies, it goes away so easily.
Yeah, and so that's part of the acceptance part, but really it's the curiosity, like, oh, wow, it's interesting, that's where I'm going. And then, well, do I want to stay with this? Is this that important? Or do I want to go back to this practice? But we can't make that decision unless we have that line that's drawn through the middle of those waves as a place to go back to. That line is no place to be, but it's something to orient towards. So it's not only a point of reference for a given meditation practice or concentration practice or mindfulness practice. It's a point of reference for our practices over time, which I'll get to later. But even if I'm just cleaning the counter and I get distracted, I can bring myself fully back to cleaning the counter and I can notice my movement of mind. So that's the quality of experience that I want my students to have over and over and over again. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that it's one thing to use this in yoga or meditation or martial arts, but it can be also used in academics. So for instance, I teach a classical literature course, and right now we're just about to begin the Odyssey. We just read the Hebrew, the translation from the Hebrew of the book of Genesis, so a translation in the Hebrew tradition. And one of the things I do with my students, some of whom have a lot of difficulty concentrating on a very, very foreign text, is to be able to stay with the feeling of something being difficult a little longer every time, and noticing as their skills change and their mastery changes. Now, how can a person recognize their change and growth of mastery if they don't stay longer with the feeling of frustration and the desire to avoid or to dismiss? And this is where these different diagrams come together. A person's reading something that's difficult, it's very foreign, it's got unusual words, it's in different cadences, and this is stupid. What does this have to do with my life? or just getting frustrated. Why am I so stupid? I don't know how to read this stuff. This is too difficult for me. These techniques, we can adapt these techniques to helping students hang in there a little longer until there's an opening with whatever they're working with. It might be cleaning the kitchen, it might be algebra. So this leads me to the next part of what I wanted to present, which was, what is the nature of knowledge in high school? And again, this is an avenue of discussion that Gene Genlin really influenced me in, because I hadn't really engaged with the nature of knowledge, with epistemology, all that much in the last 10 years or so. But with focusing and reading his more philosophical work, I started getting more interested in it because I could observe it in myself, because my own practice, my own introspection had become structured and acute enough for it to mean something to me. And so what is knowledge in high school, right? What is the nature of knowledge? So a lot of times in secondary school, what gets pushed is, head knowledge, facts, certain narrow skills. For some students, there's participation in real holistic things like theater or sports or dance, or social clubs or community service. But for the most part, the emphasis in school is on a kind of intellectual development, and maybe not even that, certainly doing better on these standardized tests. So what kind of knowledge is that compared to what we've been doing for the last, hour or so? The nature of the knowledge that we were just exploring is direct experience of ourselves. The nature of knowledge in your standard American high school classroom is of not just of an intellectual character, but it's validated by authorities outside of the student, and then given to the student as saying that you have to learn this, or at least remember it for a little while in time for the test. So Henry, if you would put up the field graph, this is a XY axis that I tweaked a little so it wasn't so rectilinear, and I had to move the words around a little bit because it didn't feel right. But if you look at this as a way of charting out certain types of knowledge as it's conveyed in high school or not conveyed, as the case may be, what do we have there? I mean, what I'm about to say is certainly arguable, but let's just take it as a point of departure. So here, objective and subjective. Subjective means that we experience it directly and it's validated by our own direct experience. So right now I feel pretty relaxed. That's subjectively validated. Now the rest of you might be seeing me and saying, oh, he looks pretty relaxed. That's more objectively validated because it's from multiple points. So subjective, objective. Empirical and rational is a little different. So empirical is tested. And then, provisionally established as true. So this table is hard, knock, 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 knock. This room has some light in it. I can test that. I can test what the floor is made out of or what the subfloor is made out of. I can test the pH of the water that I'm drinking. These are empirical things. Rational is more about a system of knowledge that's internally consistent. So it's perfectly rational for a yoga teacher to believe that most of a person's health problems arise from not breathing correctly, not holding posture correctly, not being in a certain kind of physical conditioning. It's rational, it's consistent with that yoga teacher's belief. It's perfectly rational for a certain strain of Christian thinking to assume that this terrible violence we see sometimes is caused by Satan in the world. That's perfectly rational. It's consistent, internally consistent with their beliefs. So if we were to look at a kid sitting down in a high school classroom taking an algebra test, it's pretty objective what knowledge she's trying to demonstrate. And it's pretty rational in the sense that algebra is an internally consistent system. Now, if she was using, say, calculus to develop and to then evaluate a bunch of experiments in, say, physics or something, that would be on the objective and empirical side as well. Now, if we go to the bottom right, where it's rational and subjective, I would say this is more like personal belief systems, like more like a Christian, a certain type of Christian believing in Satan's actions in the world, or a Buddhist believing that the mind creates all the problems. And then to go back up to the top right again, my apologies for scrambling this a little bit, but an objective and rational, that might be like a political ideology. So, I might believe that, for better or for worse, free markets are really the only way to properly set the prices of goods in a society. And I can demonstrate it, and it's pretty consistent internally, and it's a belief shared by many other people. So that's an objective and rational. But a subjective and rational might be more like a personal ideology or a mystical belief system, or William Blake or Swedenborg or someone like that. But one of the things that's not taught in high school is this bottom left quadrant of the empirical and the subjective. And this is meditation practice. So what we've done is, when we are in meditation or in one of these reflective practices, silent cleaning, bowing, 33 times, counting our breaths, we are directly experiencing ourselves, which is empirical, and since it's ourselves, it's subjective. And nobody else can validate it for us. It's validated solely from our own direct experience of ourselves. And a lot of what I have presented so far is really in that quadrant of the empirical and the subjective. And it's something that is sorely missing from a lot of secondary education, high school education, but more importantly, it really is key to the integration of this highly differentiated brain, this very changing kind of disconnected brain that a 10 or 11-year-old has. And then as she becomes a 13 and 14 and 15-year-old, this brain is integrating, and it's crucial that she begin to have empirical subjective experiences to explore herself in a kind of in a way that just emphasizes direct experience. So if we could just take a moment just to reflect on listening to the Eric Satie piece. maybe notice the different ways that for each of us it was empirical and subjective. Not the experience of the music, but rather the experience of directly experiencing the music and the movement of our mind into and away from the music. Let's give ourselves a moment to reflect on that. Okay, so any thoughts or comments on this?
We could also welcome people to talk. There's not many, and you could just put in the chat that you want to share your video, and you can talk to us live.
Oh yeah, please do. That would be fine.
So we had a raise. So I'm going to assume that means you want to talk. So I'm going to bring you in. Hi, Mary Edgar.
Okay. We just say the empirical part and the subjective is lacking at school, right? I'd like just to say, what are you suggesting? Is it to teach mindfulness as something different, or like an approach, like to teach a different subject in a mindful way?
Are you a teacher?
I'm a teacher, yes.
What subject do you teach?
French and philosophy.
Oh, okay. So how old are the students?
They are teenagers. They are from 12 to 18,
Okay.
secondary school.
Oh, okay. And so you teach philosophy. So
And French, yeah.
yeah. So what's an example of a little bit of text or a philosophical idea or observation that your younger students, like your 15-year-old, finds difficult to get their head around?
If like I go to the problem related to ethics, mainly like ethics, most of them find difficult based off the current theory in the world. If I go like something like deontological ethic and based on the duty, or one based off the means, they find a lot of difficult. So when I say, right, okay, we can reflect about that's my duty, I have to do it, or you can base your decision on the result, the consequences. So
Okay.
what is the best thing, the best cause of the action? They always find very difficult to argue both ways.
Right. So you find it. So your students find it difficult to argue both sides.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So, so from this perspective, right? From this mindfulness perspective, or this perspective, I still don't have a better word for it, but a student can feel the frustration of not being able to argue the other side, right? So she might say, no, what's important are the results. If this saves more people's lives or allows more babies to be healthy, even if it causes these other problems, the most important thing is to save these babies right now. right? Let's just say it's like something like introducing a bunch of free food into an area, right? And then another a counter might be, well, that will really distort the market and hurt farmers, and in the long term may create more shortages, right? Something like that. And she might be so stuck on babies, right, that she can't argue the other side. Is that kind of what you mean?
Mhm.
Right, so teenagers are so good at that moral, that's the moral function, but she's feeling it in her heart, she's feeling it in her stomach, she's feeling it in her throat. Like letting her say, so this is so strong for you. I really admire how powerfully you feel this. Where do you feel this? What is this like for you? And if she can start to sense that and then step away from that physical feeling a little more, that's helping her, even though she feels something passionately, that's helping her make a little room to see the other perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's no room right now because physiologically she's so involved. So maybe doing an exercise like from focusing or something where say, okay, we talked about some difficult things in this class. Let's take a few moments to just quietly go back to what was difficult. Notice a part of your body that feels tense or hard or braced. Maybe breathe into it and try to see what that part is trying to tell you, like why this is so important. Try to imagine what it would be like to be, to hear it. And maybe I can, and then say, and what would it be like to disagree with it? Do you feel something else in your body? Something new come up? She might say, reject it right away, and then that's the dismissive, right? Or she might just pull away from the feeling and not, see what I mean? Like that experience, that's more, I think where we miss with teenagers is that they have such strong physiological responses to moral and relationship experiences, they don't really abstract it. And then we put that as saying, oh, they're not cognitively dealing with it, but what they really are is 100% feeling it. And they haven't learned to take a step back. And that's where I think focusing is really helpful. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
That's a kind of mindfulness, but it's really kind as a teacher to say to a student, okay, so there's a lot of other ways of knowing right now. There is, that these young children need to be saved. You feel it in your throat and in your heart that this is true. And then another part is you also knows that there's other ways of looking at the world. And that person who has another way of looking at the world really wants you to hear them. And that person's actually real. This classmate, this baby is abstract, but this person in front of you who disagrees with you is real. So what about your kindness now? What is your ontological problem now? Do you mistreat the person who's real in front of you because of this imaginary baby? And then what is your feeling with this? You see what I mean? And so by bringing it into the body, other kinds of meaning and knowledge begin to open up to them. But it's still theirs. It's still their own experience. Rather than me telling this person, you need to be more empathetic, or you need to learn how to listen to other points of view. That's invalidating. You lack this. Instead of saying you lack this ability to listen to this person you disagree with, what the hell is going to happen to this democracy with people like you? You say, oh, look at what you're feeling. You're feeling so many different things, and there is this opening for this other opinion. What is that like? And that's the different parts of the brain beginning to connect with each other. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was a really great question. And I'm really excited for your students. You get to really, they're really getting good stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Megan and Edgar. I'm going to bring you back into the viewers list.
Well, I like that. That's a really neat format. That was enjoyable.
Cool.
So, yeah, I have a lot of experiences like that day to day in this school where just really appealing to, a lot of times people see kindness as an ideal rather than something one feels and experience physically. And a lot of us are afraid to be kind because it's vulnerable, and it's not, a lot of kids come into high school not having experienced kindness and compassion as a position of power and influence and mastery, rather than self-mastery, rather than as a kind of saint-like quality that they don't possess. And I think that's really unfortunate. And that really does come with intellectual, training and intellectual dominance. And I think our elite students learn that lesson very well and really limit themselves. It's a real disservice to those kids. So with that is interesting. So if we go back to what I was saying early on with that those 9 functions that Dan Siegel puts out, and one of them being morality, we often will, as adults, point out that young people are being hypocritical, or that they are saying one thing and doing another. And the way we often point that out is from a kind of intellectual observer and authority perspective. And what we point out is that they're lacking something. This way, this more phenomenological approach, or a focusing approach, or a kind of adapted Zen approach, is a way of moving the student to an awareness that she has all of this ability already inside, already with her. This ability to make room for another perspective. And so this isn't intellectual training, this is self-awareness training. And that's creates a room for more intellectual growth, as well as many other types of growth. Okay, are there any other questions or perspective? You don't have to ask a question, you can give a perspective. That would be very interesting as well.
Yeah, feel free to raise hand like Marian Edgar did as well, or write to say that you want to come on screen.
And feel free to interrupt, because I'm pretty good at shifting gears. I don't have any, if something occurs to anybody that doesn't seem quite relevant right now, it's no problem at all for me to just to jump back. I'm perfectly happy to do so. But so for now, let's try this was, oh, okay.
We have, oh, sorry, Sue, I didn't see the hand.
Okay, let's do
so I'm
that.
going to bring you in. Oh, now I see the hand.
Okay, will we bring someone in?
Yes, do you see her?
I don't see.
Hi, Sue.
Hi. I have 2 questions. One is, and I'm a parent with a teenager, what if there's complete resistance to doing what they should be doing in terms of homework? supposedly, in part, it's because they don't see the value of learning certain things. And the other question is related to how do you work with a child who's been either bullied or ostracized from a group because of expressing their own truth.
Is this the same child?
Yes.
Okay, because they're probably related phenomena, right? So it sounds, just intuitively, it sounds to me that there's kind of a pushing away of school.
Yes.
The whole thing.
Totally.
Okay, and so the totally is this kid, this young person is feeling it everywhere, and probably in a really overwhelmed way. Maybe even to the point when if you were to ask him or her to try to notice one part that's really feeling intensely, she would just say, oh no, it's everywhere. Or it's just in my head, you know. But a lot of times people who are overwhelmed globally, and kids get this way because school is such a dominant part of their lives, don't really feel it in their stomach, in their throat. They feel it everywhere or nowhere, which is kind of the same thing. And then, so this young person doesn't have a place in the school to express important ideas, new perspectives. Right?
Well, they can present it intellectually, but when it comes to certain social things, I've called him the conscience of the group, and that's one of the reasons why I think he's like pushed out sometimes.
Yeah. So how can you support him at home? How old is he?
13 and a half.
Yeah, that's pretty young. That's 13-year-olds are still children, very much. I think, anyways. You know, it's. But and is he buried in homework?
He's got learning issues.
Right.
And they give strategies, but he doesn't want to use them.
Right. So better. Right now, he sounds like he needs an ally. Right. So one thing I'd be happy to think about this more deeply, you know, outside of here, because I love this.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it. But
okay.
One thing I suggest is that when he's really upset about this overwhelming set of situations, sitting next to each other side by side and using open-ended questions, like sitting side by side is not confrontational. Really hard to argue with someone sitting side by side. And then you can use your own breathing and start to regulate your breathing. This young man, this young boy, will probably start to line up with your breathing and your physiological responses. If you're sitting side by side and not creating another set of stimuli by confrontation, by face to face, right? That's way too stimulating. So by being side to side and just, you know, general questions, excuse me, and just beginning to regulate your own body with whatever practice you have, and just really letting the opportunity arise where he can come into rhythm with you. Okay. And he will. It wasn't that long ago that he depended on you for all of that self-regulation. And he's gotten away from self-regulation. And so he probably still, I might say that he still needs you a bit to help him physiologically self-regulate.
Okay.
And just start from there. And if you want, let's get in contact a little bit later and we can do this, because I would really like to help. It's interesting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you. And there was another. Oh, Sue, I'm going to send you back.
Yeah.
And there was a Matna wanted to come on, so I'm going to do that.
The question was about who won't get in touch with any of this stuff at all. Something like that.
Perhaps
Hi,
I can clarify.
can you hear me?
Hello,
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
My question is, I volunteered a year ago with a kid. He was 11 years old, and he had he got really anxious about his homework or some assignment. And I feel like in this talk that I want to get some way of asking. I didn't manage to ask this boy to go inside and feel his feelings. So in here it sounds like very straightforward, just to ask. Well, I feel you're very, like the example you gave. Well, I feel you're very passionate about this side, but what about the other side? But how to get to little teenagers feeling with question?
So an 11-year-old is really limited in their ability to think above what they're feeling.
Mm.
So a bright 18-year-old can think clearly even while upset. But an 11-year-old really can't do that. So the important thing is to really, and the 11-year-old's probably looking to you as the adult to make it safe and predictable and calmer. And until that's achieved, nothing else is important.
Mm.
Especially if this is a child who doesn't have a lot of that at home. You know, so, and if you don't know whether the child has that at home, what's important is to establish safety and predictability and presence, just really being present. And then when there's presence, when that child starts to move with you a little bit, and then you have a little room to notice how you're feeling, I'm pretty sure that your own intuition will let you know what is next. But everything has to quiet down a little for the kid to feel safe and for you or me to be able to hear our intuition about what the right thing is. Maybe we just need to sit quietly for a little longer. You know what? I want to play a game with this guy. Let's go play a game. You'll know, it'll arise and you'll say, that feels right. And then you do it and you'll be aligned. And that might be the best thing the kid experiences all day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, keeping it real simple like that, especially with younger people, is really important. Just like if someone's upset, if they saw a car accident, you know, you want to assure them that the person's getting help and that you're going to stay with them. You know, just the first things first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First to calm it down and by myself to facilitate some calmness.
And then notice your own calmness and then let the intuition arise about what's next. This is a focusing thing. It will arise. If you're aligned with the situation and with the person, what's next, what's right, will come up.
Okay.
It just will. It has to.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And if I may, another question. For like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, I don't know. From what age can I ask a question, like a focusing question, like how do you feel or something like that? I don't know, to get to something.
Yeah, with people who haven't experienced a whole lot of independence, like a 15-year-old, you know, 17-year-olds are out in the world a bit more, right? They have a lot more experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I think that's really, really good is a lot of times younger kids can't quite identify where they feel something in that focusing way. And that's also just part of their neurological development, that they don't really sense their bodies in the same way that an older teenager or an adult does. And that's also part of sexuality developing. They're kind of similar, right? A sensuality and awareness of sexuality. So I was just like, so what's really important to you? I would like this. And noticing that they're in conflict, right? They're usually in conflict. I really hate my brother. I can't stand the way he talks to me, but I really want to spend more time with him. So then it's really helpful for kids to put them in both hands. Like, so here, you really hate your brother. You want to knock his head off. Here, you just really miss him. You want to be with him, and something's changed. So which one do you think, which one feels heavier to you? Okay. I wonder if you can describe what it feels like. I can't do it. Okay, why don't you choose one and bring it closer to your heart? Just choosing one is kind of that compassion awareness thing in the triangle. Like, I think I want to feel how I hate my brother. What does it feel like as it comes close to you? I don't want to have it any closer to me. Okay, what if you just stayed right there? I wonder if you can notice something like in your throat or in your chest or in your belly. I wonder if there's something there. And if it's uncomfortable, I wonder if you can move it away a little. And then they're learning that they can control the feelings. They can have a direct experience of the feelings. And then, do you want to spend a little time with this other one of really missing your brother and being with him? Like, no. Okay, so let's just see if holding it right there is comfortable, if you can just notice anything about it. Maybe if you're a little curious, you can bring it just a little closer. That's real concrete, but they will still respond. And it's binary, it's one or the other, so there's a choice, but it's not too complicated. And you're guiding it, so they're not just getting lost in their kind of immature thought system. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works with the younger folks. It also helps with people in crisis, like older people who are really stuck and they can't get anywhere because they're dissociating a bit. This helps to begin. It tunes them in, and then they can do more sophisticated stuff later. That's my experience anyways.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Good now.
So we will run out of time, and there's just a couple of things I want to go over, if that's okay. So that was all really interesting, those questions, because right in the weeds, And if we look at what we've gone over, we accept, from Daniel Siegel, that relationships shape the brain. And early relationships shape the brain, and adolescent relationships really shape the brain. And that direct experience, experiencing things for ourselves, is how we learn best. So in order for young people to get healthier and to create a better foundation for adult life, they need to directly experience themselves and their relationship with themselves, say in that triangle diagram, and then doing that, create for themselves relevance and safety and joy for themselves. That's becoming centered, is when we can do that for ourselves, even in a difficult situation. That's being centered. That's what wisdom feels like. And of course, a 16-year-old doesn't have very much experience with wisdom. It's not something they associate with young people. And yet, that experience of tuning in, of directly experiencing themselves, whether it's in chemistry or philosophy or being with an adult in a after-school situation or in a family setting or anything like that, whatever it is, being able to establish the relevance of your feelings and sensations, safety to do so, and the kind of joy or curiosity in all that, that's being centered. And that is what wisdom is. So much like, you know, if we're aligned with somebody and we create the quietness to hear our intuition, what arises will be the next thing. Most of the times people say, oh, that was really wise. That was wisdom right there. Now, wisdom's the conditions that we create in the relationship for this next step to arise. To me, that's the way I look at it. But this needs to be cultivated throughout the high school years. Otherwise, a big opportunity is lost. So just before we wrap this up, you know, at this school, at the Lotus School, we do this in academics by helping the student see their own experience of frustration and joy as part of them learning about themselves as learners, and then being curious about their peers as well. And their peers' experience as learning to be learners. In meditation, the different types of meditation, we teach them to directly experience those sensations in a bit more of an abstract setting, in the sitting in the cushion or cleaning. In martial arts and yoga, they learn to do it with their bodies, that this awareness arises with their bodies. So often holding a pose or working through a martial arts form, they'll find themselves interrupted by thoughts, much like all of us did listening to the Vexations piece. Those interruptions are not irrelevant. They're completely worth paying attention to, but let's choose to pay attention to them or choose to put them aside. That's wonderfully integrating for the teenage mind. Oh, I can't stop thinking about this because I'm doing this homework I don't want to do. Okay. If they can learn to say, wow, this is really important to me and this algebra is not important to me, or this history text is not important to me. But you know, getting a grade is important to me. And I like my teacher, that's important to me. So which do I want to spend time with right now? Now, if you have a young person who's able to do that, they're probably going to be all right. And then we also have really good food here, and cooking and eating is an important part of what we do. So just the direct nourishment of other people and each other really sends a message of care and sharing. And throughout the day, we have recitations. We have 4 a day that remind us of different things, like being open to teaching in the morning, of appreciating the cycle of life and all the effort that went into bringing us and preparing us food, of letting go of what happened in the morning and being open to what's next, and of reminding us not to waste time and to waste effort, that another day has passed. And it's time to really apply ourselves, to be honest about our effort over the course of the day. So we do those 4 recitations every day. And then there's caretaking of the building, you know, cleaning things up so other people can use it and noticing your own impact on your immediate environment. And then there's serving others. And all of these things taken together meet these important developmental needs. And it's far more than just academics or achievement. So lastly, Henry, could you put up that wave image again? Wonderful, thank you. So this image could certainly be you know, the movement of your mind. If that white little, that pale line in the middle is just our practice, So let's just say I'm with a young person, one of my kids, who are older now, but one of my kids or one of the many young people that are in my life. And I'm sitting with them and they're upset and we're not quite getting along. And at that moment, I decide that I'm really going to listen with my whole heart. I'm just going to listen, and I'm going to notice when I react, and I'm going to notice that reaction, and I'm going to put it aside until I am really sure that this young person has said what they need to say, even if there's a lot of quiet, even if there's a lot of anger. So that white line there is that practice of listening, both to this young person and to myself, but not reacting to myself and not reacting too much to them, of making that kind of space. Listening to both of us, but me not talking. And those waves might represent times where I get intensely desirous of giving advice, or wanting to object to the way that the facts are being presented, or wanting to object to the tone of voice. But I put that aside and I go back to that white line, which is, I'm here to listen to this person and I'm here to notice my own reactions. Now that line is the ideal. It's not what we actually do in the world. What we actually do in the world are those waves, but that line is what we move back towards. And it's actually the movement back towards that line, that ideal practice that we're living actually is, and we are learning and are integrating the different parts of our brain and our experiences. It's the movement back to the line, not so much the goodness or badness of our practice. Similarly, with that triangle, you go from concentration to awareness and then compassion. Even if your concentration is totally fragmented and all over the place, if you're going around that triangle several times, or dozens of times a minute, you're still practicing awareness and compassion and concentration. So there's only good comes of it. And lastly, that wave image, that's not just our meditation today, but that's our practice over very long stretches of time. That's us as parents, as lovers, as teachers and therapists, as servants, as anything. We waver all the time. And and recognizing that we move through and around an ideal and away from an ideal, but that ideal is there not to judge us, but to give us a point of reference in order to see ourselves better. Setting limits on young people, on teenagers, is not about setting rules. It's about establishing a basis, like an ethical or moral or practical basis for conduct in order so they can see themselves. You know, you have the car, then you have to be home at 11 o'clock. A couple minutes after is fine, but if you're always going to be a few minutes after, now we have to see what's going on. It's a way of opening up an awareness. It's not something that's meant to be, it doesn't have its own reality. It's a tool. Boundaries and limits are tools. And if you look at them the same, that counting your breath is a tool for opening up an awareness, or having chores is a tool for opening up awareness, or doing yoga is a tool for opening up as awareness. Let's not mistake the tools for the actual experience of living. And that is the primary purpose of Zen practice, but it is really the primary practice, the primary purpose of all these practices. It's that gentle moving back all the time.